A couple of days ago, I heard about something absolutely absurd, and it was called the quote, Wheel of Privilege. Now, when you first hear the words Wheel of Privilege, you're probably thinking it's just some type of lame, new age band name, but you'd actually be wrong because somehow it's something worse. The Wheel of Privilege and Power, which is its official name, is a political graphic visualizer made by Sylvia Duckworth. Now, you might be asking yourself, who on earth is Sylvia Duckworth? And to that, I'd say, great point. I didn't even know who she was either. Well, before I heard about this ridiculous wheel. Anyways, if you're wondering who Sylvia is, I have an answer. According to Sylvia's website, quote, Sylvia is an award-winning teacher from Toronto, Canada, with more than 30 years teaching experience in the classroom. She is an EdTech consultant and a sketchnoting evangelist on a constant quest to find ways for teachers and students, to connect, collaborate, and create. She's a Google certified innovator, Google certified trainer, Apple distinguished educator, and author of the books, quote, Sketchnoting for Educators and, quote, How to Sketchnote, a step-by-step manual for teachers and students. Damn, I thought Kamala Harris's word salads were bad. Speaking of Kamala, check out this artwork that Sylvia made. Well, at least that miserable sledge of corporate buzzwords is finally read through. Only trust me, it only gets worse from here. First, let's deconstruct what this self-congratulating and grandiose definition is really saying about her in, non-buzzword terms. Okay, let's start at the top. First, Sylvia is an award-winning teacher from Toronto, Canada, with more than 30 years teaching experience in the classroom. So, she's a teacher. Most teachers earn awards in some way or another and can easily justify including the term award-winning in their bio by either not stating their awards or making a second reference page full of nothing burger groupthink awards. She included a reference link to all her awards that justify calling herself award-winning in her bio. So let's take a look. Her biggest award is called the Prime Minister's Teaching Award of Excellence, which, I have to admit, at first glance seems like a very big award. Reading her blog, though, and other professors' opinions online about teaching awards, it seems that, unfortunately, teaching awards aren't what they used to be. The general vibe I get from reading her blog is that this award is just a self-congratulatory, elitist circle jerk. And when talking about teaching awards, one professor on a teaching forum commented, quote, most teacher awards are either a popularity contest if student nominated or highly political if faculty nominated. It's quite sad, frankly. End quote. And for Sylvia here, this seems quite true. In her blog post about the award, she writes, quote, on Tuesday, October 7th, 2014, I was honored with the Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence with 9 other teachers and 7 early childhood educators. For 3.5 days, we celebrated with tours and festivities in our nation's capital, culminating with meeting the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. Wow, this totally sounds in touch with normal, everyday working class people and not totally elitist. She then spends the next couple pages talking about all the things the elitist activist teachers did to celebrate their own award. Her article says, quote, we then went on a tour to Victoria Island for a, quote, Aboriginal experience. 2 lovely young Aboriginal women in traditional dress showed us the ways and customs of their ancestors with a tour of their grounds, complete with teepees, a mini longhouse, and many original handmade tools, finishing with a delicious snack of freshly made bannock and blueberry jam. The highlight of the morning was when they entertained us with traditional dance, then invited us to join them in a circle dance, hand in hand. Yeah, nothing says down-to-earth person like eating cheese and crackers with elitist politicians to celebrate your activism award right after taking a ferry to be, quote, entertained by tribal people dancing. But hey, at least she can give herself a pat on the back for letting everyone else know just how diverse and inclusive her leisure activities are. Oh, and by the way, I'm not exaggerating about the cheese and crackers thing. In the very next paragraph, she states, quote, later, we visited the Prime Minister's wife, Lorraine Harper, at their home on 24 Sussex Drive. We nibbled on cheese and crackers and had cocktails in her living room. She served us snacks which included Lancaster cheese, truly the best cheese in the world. End quote. And she also mentions that the Prime Minister's wife, quote, regaled us with stories of visiting diplomats, end quote. Anyways, personally, I'm starting to get the impression that these awards are mostly just displays of elitism, political activism, and compliance, not for teaching. In my opinion, these awards are vapid and don't measure up to very much in the real world. I have a theory that these awards are used by institutions to make professors feel more important, which will help them forget how much personal agency they've lost in their own classroom to regulations, micromanaging faculty, and radical government agendas. Another idea I had is that these awards are given to the most radical professors in order to show favoritism to the most radical teachers, which motivates other professors to fall more in line. Considering the other two awards were so obscure that I could only find a little bit of information about the award itself and zero information on what the award was for, and one of them required being part of a paid organization to receive, I'm just going to skip them. Okay, so far we've gathered that she's a teacher of 30 years in Canada and has won 3 awards, one of which is sort of Googleable. The next sentence in her bio is, quote, she is an edtech consultant and sketchnoting evangelist on a constant quest to find ways for teachers and students to connect, collaborate, and create. Now, this has got to be one of the most confusing sentences in her bio. Like, what is this even supposed to mean? This sounds like the bio a tech bro in Silicon Valley would have, not a teacher. According to Google, edtech is just a word for educational technology, which is also just a buzzword for modern classroom that I'm guessing startups like to use because it makes their company seem more cutting edge to investors. Quote, educational technology is the combined use of computer hardware, software, and educational theory and practice to facilitate learning. When referred to with its abbreviation, EdTech, it often refers to the industry of companies that create educational technology, end quote. Right, so a modern classroom. Doesn't this just seem like common sense? What classroom isn't utilizing modern technology to teach its students? It's almost like that's how classrooms have always worked. For example, the first commercial typewriters were introduced in the 1870s, and by the 1910s, they were being used in classrooms to teach students how to type. Wow, that almost sounds like the internet. The personal computer was first introduced around the early 1970s. It took a while for the general public to adopt it, and then by about the early 2000s, quote, K-12 schools began introducing one-to-one computing programs, which provide every student with an electronic device, end quote. Well, I guess they had EdTech in the early 20th century too. Amazing. But do you see what I mean? These institutions and the people within them always want to use fancy buzzwords to make themselves seem more important than they really are. What really confuses me about this bio is that it's completely unspecific. For example, she says that she was an educational tech consultant, but doesn't specify where. Does she just mean that she was a consultant in general, or that she gave advice to other teachers? Does she have a business? Well, it looks like we'll never know. Anyways, let's go back to the bio. Quote, she is an edtech consultant and a sketchnoting evangelist on a constant quest to find ways for teachers and students to connect, collaborate, and create. Well, the phrase sketchnoting evangelist wasn't on my 2025 woke terminology bingo card, but I digress. This is just a fancy way of saying that you make illustrated notes. And honestly, no hate for doing what you love. I respect all forms of art, even if I heavily disagree with the artist, but more on that later. Considering she has multiple other posts where she talks down about Christianity, I highly doubt she actually means that she's an evangelist here, which honestly just makes her entire bio way more weird. According to Google, an alternate definition of evangelist is, quote, a zealous advocate of something. But still, why use the word evangelist? This type of weird cult-like terminology is exactly what alienates everyone else from the radical left. The last part of her sentence is that she's, quote, on a constant quest to find ways for teachers and students to connect, collaborate, and create, end quote. Again, this just sounds kind of redundant. Isn't this what most teachers do every day? In the last sentence in her bio, Duckworth puts, quote, she's a Google certified innovator, Google certified trainer, Apple distinguished educator, and author of the books Sketchnotes for Educators and How to Sketchnote, a step-by-step manual for teachers and students. All right, finally some actual accomplishments. In my opinion, writing a complete book is impressive and cool no matter what you write it about, so I'm not going to go after her for that. But once again, the buzzwords are just flat out ridiculous. From my research, Google Innovator is just a Google certification to gain a title, and all it takes to join is a 3-day online class, passing a Google exam, and filming a 90-second interview with someone that details a problem you want to solve. You don't even need to solve the problem. You just need to do an interview with someone who has a problem. And yes, I did get this information from Google's own page on this certification. The most suspect part of this certification, though, is that you don't need to do anything to continue to be a, quote, Google innovator. In Google's frequently asked questions section, the question, how do I remain an active innovator after my first year, has the 3 answers of 1. Continue working on a high-impact innovator project of your choosing. 2. Be an influential advocate for using Google's technologies to transform education. And 3. Leading Google programs to drive innovation and transformation in their school or school systems. Which, in my opinion, is total BS. This sounds like an unpaid brand ambassador, not a valid certification. Based on these answers to the question, it seems like Google is just trying to get more educators to be loyal to their product and influence the schools they work at to spend more money on their services. Not really a certification to brag about. The other qualification she lists is, quote, Google certified trainers. According to Google, quote, Google certified trainers are educational professionals who help teachers redefine the teaching-learning process by incorporating technology into their classrooms, end quote. I mean, great, I guess, but what technology is she incorporating into classrooms? It's not like she's revolutionizing the education industry or anything, and the sketch notes, as she calls them, are essentially just educational illustrations. Considering that those have been around since the dawn of education books, what exactly is she doing that's innovative here? And no, taking the work done by real developers of a pre-existing technology service like Google and finding out how you can apply it to some niche in education is not innovative. Also, I wonder why Google is so interested all of a sudden in incorporating new technology into classrooms. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that Google is a technology company. Now, the last and possibly most unforgivable corporate buzzword in her bio is, quote, Apple Distinguished Educator. Now, to be fair, that sounds pretty legitimate. This must be a seriously elite certification only given to the highest level teachers, right? Well, let's see. According to Apple, quote, in 1995, Apple created the Apple Distinguished Educators Program to recognize K-12 and higher education pioneers who are using Apple technology to transform teaching and learning. Are you kidding me? This is what being an Apple certified educator means? Apparently, any educator that uses Apple products suddenly deserves to be certified. But wait, it gets worse. When you scroll further down on Apple's website, it gets kind of murky. First of all, it states, quote, Trusted advisors. ADEs are experts on the realities of integrating technology into learning environments, and they work closely with Apple to foster innovation in education, end quote. And this kind of just sounds like Apple is trying to get teachers to convince the school that they work at to rely on their products to teach in order to make more money from them. After all, institutions are where all the money is at. For example, if a professor could convince their college that they need to convert their computer lab to Mac instead of the PCs that they already have, the school will probably end up spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on more computer upgrades. And that's not even covering the subscriptions Apple requires institutions to buy in order to use their products. Further down their page, Apple states, quote, Global ambassadors. ADEs work together to develop and promote powerful ideas for improving teaching and working worldwide, end quote. Wow, they really just said the quiet part out loud. But at least Apple isn't being misleading here like Google seems to be. Having one of these certifications is just being an unpaid ambassador with no commission, making potentially hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in profit for some mega corporation just for the chance of getting breadcrumbs of recognition and a title in your bio. Now that we've examined everything about her bio, let's rewrite it for her, but this time without any LinkedIn buzzwords. Sylvia Duckworth is an educator of 30 years from Toronto, Canada. Having been illustrating political notebook graphics for over a decade, she is an official brand ambassador for Apple and Google, as well as being the author of 2 illustration books. Wow, see what happens when you take away useless buzzwords? This version is worded in a way that actually makes sense to a regular person and is still relatively impressive. Alright, before I get into the stupid graphic visualizer that almost made me prematurely write Sylvia off as an imbecile, let's take a quick look through her Instagram, because maybe I just read into the, quote, wheel of power and privilege too much and judged her too early. To my surprise, I was actually able to find some stuff that I agreed with. For example, I agree with this drawing. No, but wait, genuine misunderstandings are actually a valid moral gray area sometimes. Well, I was able to find this drawing, which is probably the first drawing I've seen her make that I can definitely get on board with. Oh wait, never mind. Alright, I give up. I don't think I like any of this. But to be fair, her apology graphic wasn't too bad, and I can agree that she's objectively a skilled artist. Because I genuinely couldn't find one single Instagram post that I wholeheartedly agreed with, I spent the next 30 minutes looking through all of her Instagram posts to try to find just one post that we can both agree on. And there were a couple that I could get on board with in the first slide or two, but then she threw a curveball at me that I couldn't agree with on the final slide. For example, I can totally agree with this graphic, and I can even agree with the second slide. But then on the final slide, she writes, quote, everybody on Earth descended from people that lived in Africa, which is not scientific. Personally, I think this is unprofessional, especially because she doesn't provide any source to substantiate this claim and doesn't even acknowledge the fact that this idea is only a theory. This is something I see a lot of high-level academics doing, especially professors, and I think it's super annoying. If you're teaching about an idea or a theory, even if there's a lot of evidence to support it, you should still acknowledge at least at one point that it is a theory, because that's called being intellectually honest. A good way to go about this would be saying something like, this is the leading theory/model in the scientific community, and although, like many theories, it has not yet been proven, the vast majority of academics accept it. After about 40 minutes of searching, I finally found this graphic. The first thing she's made that I can fully agree on. The truth is, some people really are, in fact, committed to misunderstanding you, no matter what you do. So, I feel you, Sylvia. Well, it only took an hour, but it looks like I finally found some common ground with the artist behind the Wheel of Privilege, or whatever. Before I tell you why I think the Wheel of Privilege in Power is complete bogus, let's look at some other drawings Sylvia made that didn't make any sense. Well, it only took me 2 seconds to find another bogus graphic made by Sylvia. First of all, this is blatant misrepresentation of data, and I will explain that in a minute. Second of all, portraying data in a disingenuous way like this to peddle a narrative is downright racist. Imagine if a white person made a graphic like this about every race's single motherhood status. Obviously, whoever made that would be called racist. What's especially off-putting about this graphic are the big words right on top saying, quote, who should we be most afraid of, end quote. So let me get this straight. Sylvia has made a graph of multiple races being negatively represented and is actually trying to tell her viewers that they should have a larger bias of fear for one race over another. Once again, that's blatantly racist, but according to the woke radical left, as long as someone is white, it's perfectly okay to portray disingenuous data in whatever racist way you'd like. On top of that, the most incredible part about all of this is that this graphic was made by, wait for it, a white person. For some reason, white liberal women educators are genuinely some of the most racist people you'll ever meet, because they treat being friends with and getting the approval of minorities as some type of exclusive VIP membership. To me, it feels like these type of self-righteous, virtue-signaling white women don't actually want to be friends with the minorities they're trying to constantly get approval of. In my opinion, they're just using these people as accessories to make the people they want approval from glower at how much diversity they have in their friend group. So, to any minorities listening to this, first of all, nice to meet you. Second of all, if you're wondering if your woke friend is actually friends with you for the sake of it, or because they're trying to use you as an accessory to showcase how diverse they are, ask yourself this. How often is our friendship seen in public around people my woke friend knows, And how often does my woke liberal friend post or talk about us hanging out together on social media? If the answer is that your progressive friend only hangs out with you where you're seen around people they know, or constantly needs to post you guys hanging out together on social media, they might just be using you to demonstrate to their woke higher-ups what a diverse friend group they have. Also, on this post, Sylvia captions, quote, "The tragic shooting deaths in Atlanta yesterday are a reminder that a white man with a gun is the most dangerous criminal of all. Hashtag stop hate crimes. Hashtag gun control. Hashtag white supremacy kills. P.S. Had to turn off comments because racist white male gun lovers were triggered. Parentheses, pun intended, close parentheses," end quote. Once again, Sylvia is just being racist. I highly doubt everyone in her comment section that disagreed with this insincere data only consisted of white people. I mean, think about how racist that idea is. According to Sylvia, if you aren't the exact black male that fits her ideal phenotype of not liking guns, then apparently you don't exist. And apparently, if you're a black man who wants to defend your family by owning a firearm, supposedly, at least according to Sylvia, you don't exist either. So as a result, Sylvia is not only suppressing black voices and opinions here, but worse, acting like they don't exist in the first place. According to Sylvia, we should listen to black people unless they say something she doesn't agree with or it doesn't fit the narrative. Then, apparently, you're just a sellout. In my opinion, this is essentially intellectual oppression, because looking at this objectively, a liberal white woman in a position of power is trying to influence the opinions of black people by either validating them and propping them up if it's a good opinion, according to Sylvia, or condemning them if it's a bad opinion. I mean, for goodness sake, just look at the way that the news media and woke Reddit users talked about minority groups that chose Donald over the other candidate. Gee, well, they certainly love minority groups. Well, until they're no longer useful pawns of power for them. Then apparently they don't like them. And finally, this post was made in response to a tragic gun event that caused the death of 8 innocent people, and she makes a joke about a trigger? Geez, sounds pretty tone deaf, Sylvia. Okay, now let's finally talk about why this graphic is complete bogus. The top of the graphic says word for word, number of mass shootings in the United States between 1982 and February 2020 by shooters' race or ethnicity. And to that I say, are you kidding me? Anyone that passed 9th grade math class could see why that data doesn't even remotely prove the point that, quote, we should be most afraid of white people, end quote. First of all, comparing races based on various metrics is downright toxic. Ironically, it's also exactly what a certain regime in Germany did in the 1940s. In fact, according to an article about the regime's racial ideology, the thought leader of this time, if you know who I'm talking about, quote, drew upon the ideas of the German social Darwinists of the late 19th century. Like the social Darwinists before them, they believed that human beings could be classified collectively as races, with each race bearing distinctive characteristics that had been passed on genetically since the first appearance of humans in prehistoric times. These inherited characteristics related not only to outward appearance and physical structure, but also shaped internal mental life, ways of thinking, creative and organizational abilities, intelligence, taste and appreciation of culture, physical strength, and military prowess. Wow, for an ideological group that seems so obsessed with distancing themselves from Nazis and labeling everyone else one, radical leftists like Sylvia here sure do sound a lot like World War II Nazis. Actually, this might be the result of political horseshoe theory, which is the idea that the most extreme players on both ends of the political spectrum end up being far closer to each other than moderates ever do. Anyways, the graphic is bogus because it doesn't account for the general percentage of each minority in America, which is something that most middle schoolers could probably point out. And what's far worse for Sylvia's credibility is that this is literally stated in the source referenced in her own graphic. And I'm being serious. Let's go to the link that she attributed as her source for the graphic. Wait, her source is Statista? That's pretty weird considering Statista is just an information aggregator, so her source is a graphic with multiple other sources. Anyways, right below the data graph that she used as her source, a header says, race of mass shooters reflects the US population. And underneath that, it says, quote, broadly speaking, the racial distribution of mass shootings mirrors the racial distribution of the US population as a whole, end quote. Are you kidding me? So Sylvia's own source clearly states directly underneath the graphic that no race is more likely to be violent than another in this context. And she still slaps a giant title on top of it that says, who should we be most afraid of? This is frankly disgusting behavior and is objectively racist because she's knowingly and purposely misrepresenting data in order to portray one specific racial demographic as dangerous and frightening. The reason this is racist is that if someone can soundly conclude to themselves that one race is inherently more dangerous than another, then that means that they have the capacity to make other damaging generalizations about other races in the future because the inherent ideological framework of racism remains the same for all groups. Sure, right now the crosshair is on white people for these types of generalizations, but what would happen in 100 years if the radical woke people suppressed white people with enough racism that they're no longer deemed powerful and they want a new battle to fight? Then the gun will turn back towards other races, because it was never about defeating the big bad white people, it's all about power. And in giving woke people the moral authority to be racist towards white people in order to beat them down, you're also giving them the authority to eventually be racist towards other groups in the future, because it's not about white skin color, it's about whatever group thinks the other has the most power. In fact, now that I think about it, this is exactly what happened to Asian people. Asian people used to be treated as helpless minorities by the radical left and victims of racism. But after Asians began doing incredibly well in college and career success, all of a sudden their issues are never talked about. What happened? I thought they were minorities. Well, here's what happened. American Asians gained high amounts of financial, career, and social power as a class and are no longer cared for by the radical left. If you're wondering what I mean, just look at the issue of Asian acceptance rate biases in universities. To demonstrate my point, on a subreddit called Ask a Liberal, someone asked, quote, do liberals generally agree that elite universities in the US have discriminated against Asian American candidates almost wholesale in the past few decades? I mean, seems like a pretty easy question to answer, right? Well, apparently not for liberals. One commenter replied, quote, I think the fact that Asian students make up 20% of college students while being 5% of the population automatically means you aren't being discriminated against. I think we need to do more for racial equality in America, so I accept colleges using race in admissions. This is a historically racist country. The only way to change that is race-based policy. So personally, I don't prioritize Asian kids getting rejected from Harvard as a key issue in discrimination. Best of luck with your program at Northwestern. Oh, the horror it must be. End quote. What? This has to be one of the most racist and nasty comments I think I've ever heard. So according to the left, if any one race or group is perceived to be more powerful or successful at something than the average person, being racist towards that group is suddenly A-okay. In my opinion, the most racist aspect of all of this is just assuming that Asians have some type of inherent advantage that other people don't have, thus making it perfectly fine to discriminate against them. First of all, this is attributing characteristics to race, which is the same type of thinking as eugenics. And second of all, you're stealing credit from them by assuming that they don't work any harder than any of their competitors. This would be like telling a black guy that just won an Olympic sprint event that of course he won because black people are good at running. In doing so, you're invalidating all the years of hard work they put into their craft and essentially saying the reason they won had nothing to do with them. Finally, the part where this user says, best of luck with your program at Northwestern, oh the horror it must be, comes off as extremely spiteful and jealous, which really demonstrates a lack of moral character and even intelligence. Obviously, this user doesn't care about any other people's issues that she perceives to give her less power or opportunity. This shows that her own self interest is her main priority, because if a minority's issues were actually her priority, like most woke liberals claim, she would have empathy for Asian discrimination and university acceptance. Another minority the radical left never talks about is Indians, despite being in between the population sizes of Native Americans and Asians, and being a very small 1% minority in America. I wonder why. Oh, yeah, it's because according to most sources, they are the highest household income demographic in America, with the highest percentage of bachelor degrees right in front of Asian Americans. On top of that, besides in police interactions, racism against Indian Americans is arguably much higher than any other minority, but once again, it's absolute crickets from the left. And if you look closely at the graph, you'll see that at the bottom of the graph is Hispanic/Latino Americans in the second lowest income and African Americans with the lowest household income in America. Two demographics the left won't ever stop talking about. Finally, what about the Jews? Maybe this is controversial, but in my opinion, the Holocaust was just as terrible as slavery. I mean, it was the largest genocide attempt in history. And yet, somehow, large-scale Jew hatred is apparently totally socially acceptable and only ever given a slap on the wrist. Wow, it's almost like whenever any demographic of people gains a certain level of power or success, blatant racism and discrimination suddenly becomes totally socially acceptable towards them. My point is, don't think that these woke lunatics will only ever use racism or discrimination as a righteous weapon to wield against the big bad white people. The truth is, it's not about the skin color for them. It's about the way that they perceive you. If you're seen as more successful than them, then they will be perfectly fine with your demise through whatever means possible. Alright, I've spent enough time getting distracted by the other disingenuous posts made by this woke Canadian grifter. Let's take a look at what I was originally planning on making this video about: her wheel of privilege and power. The first thing that sticks out to me is that apparently this wheel is even pissing off her own followers, because according to the wheel, some of them were categorized as being less marginalized than others. This seems like a natural consequence of an ideology that categorizes an individual's importance based on their ranking in the Oppression Olympics. For example, one guy commented, quote, "Putting gay men above bisexuals, pansexuals, or asexuals is ridiculous. A lot of the visibility arguments made are shallow and could apply to other groups in this wheel. Yet, apparently, this systemic power only benefits gay men." End quote. Another commenter wrote, "As wrong as this is, it shows one thing very clearly. For activists, it's never about celebrating diversity, it's about getting closer to the center of power. It's nihilistic power worship." End quote. In my opinion, this is spot on. Based on what we've seen so far, it seems like these activists don't actually care about whether or not an individual is a minority, but instead how much power they supposedly have in society. My question for Sylvia is, what gives you the right to tell another human being with the same color blood as you that they have less power in society than you do? What makes a human being incredible is their ability to overcome the adversity they were born into on a personal level, not embrace it as their identity. Every incredible person we look up to in history had some type of adversity to overcome and gained power over that adversity by taking responsibility for their actions and performance and having the determination to improve themselves despite their circumstances. In my opinion, telling other people that they're inherently at a quote lower level of power end quote in society is just as damaging to someone's determination to succeed in life as the Indian caste system. So, to break this down, let's go through the entire wheel and deconstruct what Miss Duckworth here is trying to say. And just to be clear, the main thesis of my critique of the Wheel of Power is that it assumes many things that are under your control to be out of your control. Alright, the first category we have on the Wheel of Privilege is skin color. Well, that's not a surprise. But what specifically irks me about this is that black skin, at least according to Sylvia, apparently equals less power. Now, let me ask you this. Why should any black person accept letting some random liberal white academic indirectly tell them that they have less power because of their skin color? Doesn't that seem, I don't know, racist? Next, we have formal education, which doesn't really make sense because that shouldn't be part of someone's intersectionality status. By the way, if you're confused about what intersectionality is, it's just a fancy word for your identity in society. The original intersectionality graph from only about 2 to 3 decades ago was just a couple of factors, most of which were not under said person's control. For example, this old graph I found simply lists race, gender, nationality, disability, and sexuality as aspects of someone's identity. And I can mostly agree with this because most of these factors are outside of any given person's control. But that was in the 90s, and at that point, academics still adhered to some level of intellectual honesty and hadn't completely lost touch with reality. Nowadays, we have this monstrosity. Yes, someone made it even bigger and filled it with even more ridiculous crap, but we're gonna have to get back to this wheel later. Let's get back to formal education. Your education status is definitely something that is under your control, and if you don't believe that you have power to change your education status, you should reevaluate how privileged you are to even be able to argue over this. Many people around the world wouldn't even bother to argue whether or not they could get an American or Western upper level education because they already know that they couldn't. In fact, most of them couldn't even afford an upper level education in their own country. Now, you might be saying, but what if I have kids? Well, first of all, take accountability. Most people don't have kids against their will. If you're a single mother or father, you most likely had some control over the outcome of the situation before it happened, in one way or another. And for anyone worried about getting pregnant, my main pieces of advice would be to either stop participating in hookup culture, make rules for yourself. For example, don't let yourself be under the influence of any substance without your friends there to keep predatory men away, or get a copper IUD. Now, I only say predatory men because I'm talking about men at clubs. Just to be clear, I don't think most men are predatory. And if you feel as though you need to get blackout drunk in order to have a good time, consider looking inward and asking yourself why you would want to lose so much control of your sober mind. Despite what you might think, if you're always going out to nightclubs and bars or live in a city, your perception of men is going to be skewed. Most people in environments like this aren't exactly happy and thriving, and cities tend to bring out the worst in human nature because, from the perspective of someone like Marcus Aurelius, they disrupt people's ability to clearly see their role in the natural order of the universe, which people can often easily discover in natural environments. But that's a video for another time. My main point is that you'll probably find much better examples of men outside of the club or a bar environment. If you don't believe me, go to church on a spare Sunday, and I can guarantee you that 9 times out of 10, men at church will probably treat you much better than men at the club. Now, you might be saying, without any insurance, a copper IUD is $1,300. And what I say to that is just save up your money. No, seriously. I know people that are willing to save up money for a car or an expensive trip, but not any form of birth control. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only option or the best option for everyone, but a copper IUD gives you the highest level of protection over having a baby for 10 to 12 years at over 99%. Factor in on top of this that the average cost to raise a child for 18 years in 2022 was estimated to be $310,000, which is $347,000 when adjusted for inflation in 2025, and all of a sudden an IUD doesn't seem so expensive anymore. When considering the cost of having a child, you also need to factor in opportunity costs and the cost of your time. Not that a child isn't worth your time, it's just something to think about. That being said, if you aren't willing to use any form of birth control, either don't have sex or find a man with a vasectomy. Also, I want to clarify that I'm not saying that you have to get an IUD or something. I'm just using the talking point of a copper IUD to make a broader point, which is that the money you spend on any form of birth control is far less than the cost of raising a child. If you are 100% not comfortable with having a baby, you shouldn't be having sex. It's really that simple. This might seem like a crazy concept to an over-sexualized society, but it shouldn't be. In my opinion, this is just common sense. Thought leaders and teachers need to stop acting like having recreational sex is required for survival, because it's not. The most common reason that people can't grasp the concept of spending any period of their life abstaining from sex is that they watch too much adult entertainment. And by the way, Americans watch the most porn in the world. I wonder why we're so mentally ill. I don't personally condemn anyone for watching adult entertainment because I understand how addicting it can be. But if you do, it will give you a super strong fear of missing out. Because porn gives you the feeling that everyone is having sex but you, and that you need to get some while you can. Additionally, if you routinely watch porn, you'll probably have far less control over your sexual urges, which will increase the likelihood of both becoming a single mother and a deadbeat dad. The point is, if you want to succeed in life, you just have to take accountability for your actions. Sure, it will be harder to get an education with kids, but compared to most of the rest of the world, you're still very privileged to even have the opportunity to get an upper level education from an American college, because America is one of the most valuable countries to have an education in. That being said, if you don't have kids, either be super careful who you have sex with, don't have sex at all, or don't be stingy with buying birth control or Plan B. Long story short, if you want to simplify your life, figure out how to stop watching porn and delay having sex until you're more responsible. Anyways, anyone can improve their educational status. It just depends on how much they want to and whether or not they think it's worth the effort. The next category is ability, meaning disability. Now, for this one, it's hard to argue that whether or not you're disabled is something you have control over. It's also hard to argue that someone like this has the same amount of power as an able-bodied individual. However, let me push back a little bit. I think that nowadays, more than ever in history, power comes from the ability to think critically. Thus, if you're physically disabled and yet capable of thinking, you still have the indomitable power of the human spirit, and you can still achieve great positions of influence if you want to. One example of this is Stephen Hawking. He had great influence, which can be thought of as being synonymous with power over millions of people. In fact, he was even a modern-day celebrity, with the ability to make people think deeply about their own existence, ponder science and the universe, and make people laugh. And at the end of the day, this is all that matters anyways. Celebrities grow old and die, and their body eventually becomes disabled from old age. And at that point, what really matters and what is remembered about them is what they said and how they treated other people. In fact, even for most bodybuilders, what matters the most to the people that admire them is not just the fact that they're able-bodied, but that they reached the full potential of the hand that they were dealt. If able-bodiedness was the number one factor to significance, like Sylvia seems to think, then we would treat Belgian blue cattle like celebrities. But we don't, because cows don't have human thoughts. Humans put a great deal of value on who you actually are as a person, not just what your body looks like. After all, a human is mostly the sum of their brain. You wouldn't be you without a head and just a body, but you could be you without a working body and just a head. Similarly, Marcus Aurelius had two inspiring perspectives that can apply to anything, including being physically disabled. One is that you can't control what happens to you, only how you respond. And the other one is a quote where he says, "All men suffer, but not all men pity themselves." That being said, someone who is disabled definitely has more reason than almost any other category on this wheel to pity themselves, but simultaneously, it makes it that much more admirable and inspiring when you don't. One example of someone who is physically disabled but intellectually admired is Aaron Belial from Kill Tony. He can't walk without crutches and can't speak, so a computer generates words that he writes and speaks for him. That being said, he's a golden ticket winner for the biggest live podcast in the world, meaning he can come onto the show anytime he wants and reach millions of people. He's made millions of people laugh and has influence. On 2 separate occasions, he was able to do a set in front of a packed-out Madison Square Garden. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound powerless to me. Now, you might say that I'm just cherry-picking people and that the vast majority of disabled people are at a disadvantage, and that would be true. But my point is that the wheel seems to take individual people and treat them like a group, and what I'm trying to say is that individuals are not represented only by the identity of their group. Individuals end up being whoever the fuck they want to be, and the only limiting factor is their determination, which this wheel only dissuades people from. Now, you might be asking, what about people who are mentally disabled? If society values what someone says and not only what their body looks like, then how could someone like that be influential or powerful? Well, if you're a liberal, I would say look at Donald Trump, and if you're a conservative, I would say look at Joe Biden. Anyways, jokes aside, the answer to that is that if you needed to be a certain level of intelligence in order to be influential, then most people wouldn't be capable of having any influence at all, and many more smart people would have much more power. That being said though, lots of mentally disabled people find power and influence without even meaning to. 2 examples that come to mind are Darius, an influencer on TikTok, and Beetlejuice, a celebrity who came to notoriety on the Howard Stern show and still has a dedicated fan base. To start with, Darius is severely autistic and nonverbal. Still, though, he has over 2.5 million followers on TikTok and other platforms as well, and is able to support his family financially just by being himself. Beetlejuice is also severely mentally disabled, but still has the power to make people laugh and increase their happiness. All of these people are influential, and in having influence, they have power. These people remind us that love and joy are powerful forces that everyone has equal access to, and that we should be happy and grateful with our own capabilities because others without them are. The next category is sexuality. This will be a touchy subject, so I'm not going to go too into depth on it because tackling this topic requires a lot more than just a couple paragraphs to delve into. The first thing that I will say though is that you don't have to tell everyone your sexuality. Now, I'll admit that I can't relate to this because I'm straight, but I'm going to try to actually be objective and open-minded in discussing this. And I think, ironically, I'm probably more objective and non-biased than Sylvia. First of all, I don't see how being gay puts you at a disadvantage in America in 2025. If anything, it seems like in some areas, DEI initiatives are putting gay individuals at a slight edge in terms of job opportunities, but that's besides the point. While I guess you could argue that there are certain countries you'd be less safe in, my question would be, how is that any different from anybody else? First of all, the amount of countries that openly prosecute gay people are in the minority. Besides selecting countries in the Middle East and Africa, what countries are actively persecuting gay people? Well, I was curious, so I did some research. According to the BBC, quote, there are 64 countries that have laws that criminalize homosexuality, and nearly half of these are in Africa, end quote. And considering there are 195 countries in the world, that means that in roughly 85% of the world, homosexuality is legal if you don't count the countries where it's illegal in Africa. The article also mentions that just between 2019 and 2022, 9 countries had repealed their laws on homosexuality. That being said, here's a hot take. Expressing your individuality to the world is a privilege, not a right, and everyone loses that privilege when they leave the Western nations that protect it. For example, when I lived in Mexico for 3 months, I had to change things about myself to fit in with their culture. When I first arrived there, I had a mullet and was wearing graphic t-shirts and sneakers. Because of this, most of the local Mexicans looked at me like I was weird, or even gave me nasty looks. Then, after a day or two, I quickly realized that I didn't fit in, and worse, that I was drawing unwanted attention to myself. At this point, I realized that if you don't want to draw attention to yourself in a different country, then you simply need to look and behave differently. Not all countries encourage you to just express yourself however you feel that day. In Mexico, to make myself look less like a gringo, I had to blend in. I got a buzz cut, wore white men's tank tops with sandals, and I got a nice tan. After this, I blended in so well that sometimes the locals just assumed that I was a white Mexican and seemed to expect me to speak fluent Spanish. As another example, if you're a foreigner in almost any area in Colombia, if you dress and behave exactly how you would in America, you're probably going to either get drugged or robbed, especially if you're white. But does that put me at a disadvantage on your wheel of power, Sylvia? What I'm trying to get at is if someone is gay and they feel like they don't have the same power as a straight man when they're traveling, maybe just try blending in with the country more and don't dress like you just got out of a pride parade. Everyone has to change in some way to fit in with another country. For example, if you're obese and go to Japan, you're probably going to get laughed at. Is it right for them to do that? No, but unlike being fat in Japan, if a gay person travels to a strict country, nobody is going to care unless they draw attention to themselves. Another entertaining observation about Sylvia's wheel is that she says gay men are somehow more privileged than lesbian, pansexual, bisexual, and asexual people, which I find quite hilarious because it contradicts her own narrative. If being gay inherently makes you oppressed, it should apply equally to every form of sexual divergence. But even when she's trying to be as woke as possible, she still finds a way to be sexist in the process. Brilliant stuff, Sylvia. The next category on the wheel of privilege is neurodiversity, and this one really pushes my buttons. Some of the most brilliant people in history were neurodivergent, such as Wolfgang Mozart. One source about him says, quote, despite being a prodigy as a child, he was a super fast learner and he was able to compose songs by age 6, but he would only learn fast in the areas he was interested in and anything else he was bored of. He also had sensory differences where he was scared of loud sounds, such as trumpet, therefore being sensory issue. Well, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty autistic to me. In fact, J.R.R. Tolkien, Alan Turing, Nikola Tesla, and even Albert Einstein were speculated to be autistic, and they were very likely neurodivergent. And while sure, someone like this might have difficulties that other people don't, these same people also have advantages that other people don't. As a side tangent, the entire word neurodiversity just rubs me the wrong way. What would be the opposite of neurodiversity, anyways? Just being an NPC? I feel like anyone who's successful and has a really unique personality would be considered neurodivergent by somebody just for not thinking like everyone else. Like, seriously, you can type in pretty much any celebrity or prominent person into Google, followed by autistic or ADHD, and someone on Reddit will be speculating about what undiagnosed condition they must have. One thing that annoys me nowadays is that people want to be diagnosed with something so that they can use it as a victim card whenever it's convenient for them, or as an excuse for why they weren't successful at something when they fail. And I'm just going to say right now that in the long run, this type of victimizing identity politics will get you absolutely nowhere. In the short term, you will have some advantages. Your teacher will be extra nice to you and probably will be more lenient. When you're late on getting your project submitted, you'll get a pass because you are diagnosed with ADHD or time blindness or whatever, and whenever something completely unrelated to your mental condition happens to you and you feel backed into a corner, you can always just pull out your neurodivergent victim card and convince your college faculty that they're only mad at you because you're a neurodivergent minority. Do you see how this damages you in real life? In real life, nobody cares if you're neurodivergent, they care about results. Unless you have an extreme diagnosis, you're completely capable of doing anything anyone else is. It's just going to take extra effort on your part, and that's just life. Life isn't fair, but at the same time, high-functioning neurodivergence, which I believe is completely dependent on how much work you put into disciplining yourself, can definitely be a big advantage against other people. For example, autistic people are overrepresented in high-paying careers in STEM, are capable of hyper-focusing on things, often have really good pattern recognition abilities, are more likely to be naturally musically gifted or have perfect pitch, and tend to be very good at compartmentalizing and problem-solving skills. Now, of course, this isn't true for every autistic person, but hopefully you get the point. Before I conclude in this category, I'm going to say something that is very controversial and is going to make a lot of people mad. But I need to share my view anyways, and if you disagree, feel free to let me know in the comments. I believe that most mental illnesses are self-treatable. Now, of course, you'll never be the exact same as someone who doesn't have any mental illness at all. But once again, who in the world, and especially America, doesn't have any mental illness? I feel like everyone has some type of diagnosed mental illness these days, and that just doesn't sound very much like an illness. What's worse is that some research has implied that diagnosing someone with mild symptoms of mental illness can sometimes make their symptoms worse because physicians can inadvertently contribute to the severity of it by defining someone's situation before that person has had time to come to their own conclusion about their own mental health. Essentially, sometimes doctors can jump the gun on mental illness diagnoses. Overall, though, this is a huge idea and requires an entirely separate video to support it with research. Let's talk about that neurodiversity category one last time before we move on. According to the Wheel, having autism reduces your access to power. Well, if that were true, then how would you explain Elon Musk, who is autistic and currently the richest man in the world and probably the top 5 most powerful? Do you see what I mean? It's hard to see a correlation here. Okay, next on the wheel is mental health. Once again, I think that this is somewhat under your control. In my anecdotal experience, most people that are depressed also have a depressing life. A lot of times, when I see people in poor mental health, they also make terrible life decisions on an almost daily basis. And I'm not victim blaming here. My point is that people don't ever want to take responsibility for their actions anymore and instead make bad decisions and then just excuse it by pinning those bad decisions or lack of discipline on their mental health. Also, I see a lot of people who consistently spend thousands of dollars per month on marijuana and then complain about not having enough money. In fact, I'm constantly seeing socialists who behave like this, who would rather try to increase minimum wage than take personal steps towards improving their skill set or reducing their budget. A lot of these type of people apparently think that marijuana, new Steam games, food delivery, streaming subscriptions, and Funko Pops are essentials and don't even bother to look at their bank account to weed out predatory subscriptions that are slowly draining their savings. I once heard that it's a lot easier to have good mental health when you have abs, and for me at least, this is true. One reason for this might be because when you're in an optimal healthy range of body fat, your body's hormones are more balanced and your testosterone levels get significantly higher. For some people, this is 10% body fat, and for some people, it can be as high as 20%. Everyone operates best at a certain range of body fat, and this alone can greatly improve your mental health. Also, most people should know this, but exercising improves mental health as well. Even if it's just a walk on a treadmill for half an hour to an hour, I can guarantee you that if you just make a point to walk for 1 hour a day and do this for a week, you will feel much better about yourself. In my opinion, the simplest way to find happiness is just asking yourself how much of your lifestyle matches a lifestyle that we've all evolved to live for so many millennia, or however long it's been. How long have you gone without camping, experiencing nature, hunting, foraging, or sitting around a fire? Although it sounds silly, these types of things activate some type of primal satisfaction with life. Personally, I found a lot of happiness in taking up spearfishing while I lived in Mexico. Although I was super bad at it and I never even caught a fish, everything about it just felt right to my animal brain. Waking up every day, walking, enjoying the sun and the water, and hunting for food all in one. I just felt at peace with the animal side of my brain for once, because that side of my brain was always restless to experience nature and engage in evolved, ancestral-style behavior. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's like when you're working an office job and you can look outside the window and see a beautiful sunny day, and it makes you feel restless because everything in you is just screaming to get outside and experience that nice day. If you don't contribute to this side of the brain, you'll always feel restless and frustrated because you're making yourself akin to a caged bird in modern society. Also, if you have depression, anxiety, or chronic brain fog, consider trying a diet of only ground beef and salt for 3 weeks. I know this may sound crazy, but Jordan Peterson swears by it, and he says it's the only thing that worked for his depression. After hearing Jordan Peterson talk about it, I personally tried this diet myself. What's interesting about ground beef is that it has L-tryptophan, which is a precursor to 5-HTP, and 5-HTP is a precursor to serotonin. Ground beef also has quite equal parts of all 9 amino acids, and it's theorized that this diet helps because of brain inflammation. The theory goes that some people are more sensitive to inflammation, and some people even get brain inflammation from common everyday foods. Ground beef, and sometimes the animal-based diet, is considered anti-inflammatory and reduces your brain inflammation for long enough for your brain to give itself time to heal. Long story short though, not everyone is a victim of mental illness. Believe it or not, a lot of people's mental illness is self-actualizing. Yes, you can destroy your own mental health through making terrible decisions. If you're a woman who constantly engages in going out to the club and getting drunk to the point where you're technically an alcoholic, don't be surprised when your mental health absolutely goes down the drain, along with your bank account. Also, if you're a man and you're constantly drinking, smoking, and sports betting with your buddies, don't be surprised when your mental health goes to shit. Routinely making bad decisions absolutely affects your mental health, so stop trying to act like you're a victim of your own choices. Saying something's not your fault is nice in the short term because it absolves you of your responsibility. But in the long term, it makes your life miserable because once you've pinned every outcome of your life onto something else, and you fully believe that you're a helpless victim to each of them, you no longer have any control over your life. Some people put so much blame for their life on other people and things that they might as well have been born a wild animal because in their mind, they're just as helpless and powerless. So let me ask you this, do you want your life to represent a helpless mouse who has no choice in whether or not they will be eaten, or do you want to be a lion? Because if you want to be a lion, you need to start taking accountability for your mistakes and learn from them. Truly believing you have no control over your life is only a miserable existence, and nobody should live that way. We all have agency over our lives, words, and actions, and if you want to start changing your life, start with the words, I messed up. Anyways, the next category ties in well to the same idea, body size. What the hell? Do you mean being fat? If you're fat, it's your responsibility, period. And if you don't like hearing that, you've been sold a lie that being fat is somehow part of an intersectional identity. No, it isn't. Why would it be when it's something that's completely under your control? And don't start with telling me that it's because of your hypothyroidism or whatever, because I'm frankly tired of hearing it. According to multiple sources from a quick Google search, hypothyroidism only affects 1% of the population. But you certainly wouldn't think so based on how many people have told me that they apparently have this condition. Additionally, about a decade ago, the American Thyroid Association released a booklet in which it adamantly stated that only 5 to 20 pounds of weight gain can be attributed to hypothyroidism, and also that, quote, hypothyroidism doesn't cause obesity. All in all, as someone who's gained and lost 40 pounds within the span of 2 years, I'm tired of people thinking about weight as if they're a victim of it. Perhaps there are some things that you are a victim to, such as your mother only feeding you unhealthy food growing up, and that's a legitimate point and very sad. However, if you're watching this and you're over the age of 18, you're an adult and you shouldn't be a victim anymore. The past is the past, and although having a childhood like that would suck, you have a whole lifetime to beat everyone else at being healthy. For example, a whole lot of people do high school and college sports, and once they stop doing them after education, they gain weight because they aren't used to having to keep track of their calories. Even if not for sports, most people gain a couple pounds every year, and slowly this weight adds up. Thus, if you start acquiring the difficult skill of learning how to lose weight when you're 18, you will be at a huge advantage for the rest of your life because a lot of people actually don't know, and the only thing that's keeping them from being fat is their high metabolism, their age, or the fact that they play sports. From my experience, most people just stop caring about their weight or exercising after college, and if you can just make it to the age of 25 in a healthy body, you're already in an incredibly small percentage of people, at least here in America. In fact, if you can even make it to the end of college without gaining a significant amount of weight, you will still be in a relatively small minority. So if you're fat at 18 or even in your 20s, it's not over for you. You still have a lot of life left to live. But at the same time, this is not an excuse to just go crazy and let loose. If you want to lose weight, you have to change your lifestyle. And something as simple as just quitting beer and soda could be enough to put you in a calorie deficit. In fact, many people just consume way too much alcohol, especially when they're trying to keep track of their weight. Let me say something important. If you're not trying to age 10 years and 4, alcohol is not your friend. Getting super drunk every weekend in college or high school is probably the worst thing you could do for multiple reasons. For one, you're aging your body and skin at an insanely fast rate. For two, you're more likely to make stupid choices like hooking up with people that you never would have if you were sober. And for three, alcohol has a lot of calories. Seriously though, it's actually insane how many calories alcohol has. For reference, 6 beers equals 900 to 1200 calories. And even if you just drink straight alcohol, alcohol still has 7 calories per gram, which is only 2 calories per gram less than fat. In other words, if you drank a shot of Everclear, which I definitely don't recommend, you could replace that entire shot with a similar amount of olive oil or butter, and it would pretty much be the same amount of calories. Now, I'll admit that maybe that's kind of a silly point, because people don't just drink plain Everclear, but another important thing to consider is that people really like to eat food and order takeout when they drink, and that's also bad for your bank account. On top of this, to reduce the hangover, people usually go to a restaurant the next morning and eat greasy food. Anyways, all in all, alcohol will probably set you back if you're trying to lose weight. If you're morbidly obese in college, the smartest thing that you could do is just spend however long it takes to get into the best shape you can, and then if you want, you can party. But until then, I wouldn't recommend drinking alcohol. Now, you might be telling me that that sounds boring, but even if it took you 4 years to lose all that weight, which it almost definitely wouldn't, you would have set the rest of your life up to be immensely fun and improve the quality of your life 100 times more than if you had just become a more obese alcoholic in those 4 years instead. If you're a fat chick, here's my advice. Stop looking for validation in any other way than losing weight. In college, I saw a lot of fat women trying to get validation from men by doing all types of things. Doing their hair, going out and partying, getting hookups, or wearing super stylish clothing. But doing this is a terrible idea because you're choosing to purposely disregard the only thing that will improve the quality of life that you're craving, which is your health. By doing this, you frantically search for activity after activity that might make you feel better, and none of them work. And by the time you finally get to the point that you consider losing weight, you'll be so jaded by everything else not working that you'll think the only thing that could actually improve your life won't work either, so why bother? One example of a validation shortcut for fat people is body positivity, aka fat activism. Now, I know what some of you are saying. That's not true. Body positivity is not fat activism. Well, actually, they're far closer related than you would think, and here's why. There's no such thing as body positivity. There is only positivity. Remember that quote from earlier? It goes, "You can't control what happens to you, only how you respond." And this is true for being obese or overweight as well. A lot of people had a rough childhood where they were fed unhealthy food and never had a chance to get healthy. And if that's you, you probably did have some fucked up things happen to you. Your parents probably did feed you subpar food, and your family might even peer pressure each other to not lose weight. All of these are totally possible, but you need to stop being the victim and start being the main character in your own story. You need situational positivity, not body positivity. When you look in the mirror and see your body, you should be neutral about it, not positive. If you're positive about it, you're being delusional, and if you're negative about it, you're going to spiral. The best way to view your body when losing weight is just to be objective. You could say, yeah, that's my body. It's not perfect, but it could be worse, and I'm proud of myself for working on it. In my opinion, body positivity is just situational positivity, where you're on track to improve your health and are willing to be resilient when you have a slip up or a binge. Because with a positive outlook on life, you will be able to understand that these type of mistakes are just a small roadblock, and your journey is about endurance, not speed. There's no reason to be negative about your body because you're already at the point of being unhealthy, and thinking negative thoughts about how you got yourself to this point isn't helpful for you or your goals in any way unless you're trying to learn from your mistakes. If you're always regretting what you're doing to the point that it's debilitating, someday when you're older, you're going to regret the regretting as well. You're going to wish that you didn't regret things that you could have easily changed because in doing so, you made yourself feel shameful and got distracted instead of just working on achieving your goals. Although it's easier said than done, stop regretting your mistakes. Just stay on a broad path in the opposite direction of where you came from and don't turn back no matter how slow your progress is. And as long as you know deep down that you're at least trying to go in the other direction, you can't feel guilty because you're going the right way. That being said, if you aren't doing anything about your body's health, it's hard for anyone to believe that you're really being body positive. The worst thing that could happen to an obese person is them accidentally making an identity and lifestyle out of it. Take, for example, Hungry Fat Chick. This is one of Nikocado Avocado's main friends, and she's somehow worse than Nikocado. And the reason for this is that she's made being fat a central aspect of her identity. For example, her bio says, quote, "I am Candy Godiva, a former adult fetish model who has created eating and other fetish content on the internet since 2002. It's no big secret," end quote. Now, I don't kink shame, so I'm not judging her here, and I really don't care what someone is into. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's a perfect example of what you really shouldn't do. The last thing a fat person should do is find a place where they're celebrated and financially supported for eating more. I'm sure many of her supporters constantly enable her by giving her more money for food and, more importantly, money in general. Think about it this way. If you were her and you made all the money you needed from random on the internet because you record yourself eating Taco Bell, would you really retire all of your revenue streams and getting 9 to 5 just to lose some weight and stop making YouTube videos? It's no wonder that she doesn't want to lose weight. Thus, if you're overweight, don't ever put yourself in a position where you're profiting or getting positive reinforcement for your weight or eating food because you'll probably never want to lose weight. This situation probably seems nice at first, but it's really just golden handcuffs, or 4 golden handcuffs chained together. Anyways, to get back to the main point, all of this fat activism is a great vice for people that want to distract themselves from the real problem that's reducing the quality of their life. The only magic bullet seems to be GLP-1, aka Ozempic, and although it may have some health risks, I think overall it is an incredible thing. The only gripe I have with it, however, is that if you choose to go this route, you'll gain absolutely zero of the self-discipline that you would usually acquire by losing weight naturally. I can speak from experience here because I lost 40 pounds over about a year and a half, and it was probably more because I gained about 20 pounds of muscle while I was losing the weight. The biggest benefit from this weight loss journey was not just the weight I lost, but the unbelievable amount of self-discipline I was able to gain by making myself do something I didn't want to over and over again for years. That one element has legitimately benefited my life more than anything else I've ever done, and the self-discipline that you learn from the gym is so good, at least for me, that it changes your outlook on any other task. When you routinely overcome physical challenges, you're training your brain that you can do things you previously thought you couldn't, and this effect genuinely transfers to all other aspects of your life. Once you get used to working out regularly, when you see a difficult task ahead of you, instead of feeling like cowering, brain goes into the same high energy, seize the day mode as before, and you think something like, why wouldn't I be able to do this when I just hit my bench PR this morning? The only reason I gained this power was the fact that I was able to lose weight, which was a monumentally difficult task for me, and required me to overcome my own challenges and adversity. I tried repeatedly in my journey to lose weight and would constantly face setbacks. The only thing that allowed me to finally lose weight was staying in the game and not accepting loss. By doing this, each time I came back to lose more weight, I had learned something new and leveled up my self-discipline. Thus, finally losing the weight was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done because it was kind of like the feeling of beating a really difficult video game. Self-control is a skill, and if you want to learn it, you can. When you lose, don't take it as a reason to just forget about it and be fat again. Take it as a lesson and think about what exactly caused you to fail. In doing so, you'll slowly learn how your brain thinks and why you binge food, and you'll get better at avoiding scenarios and thought patterns that trigger your behavior. So, to conclude the body size portion of the Wheel of Power, consider this. What makes the main character great in a story is overcoming adversity. Thus, you should be happy that you have a challenge. If losing weight was easy for you, your story would have less meaning. Overcoming challenges in life is what makes us human, so you should embrace the challenge and grab your life by the horns. You can't control what happened in the past, but since you were a full-grown adult, you've had control. So, take responsibility for your mistakes, which will allow you to feel like you're back in control of your life. Stop blaming your past for who you are now, and come to the realization that the only thing you can control is how you choose to respond to life. Most importantly though, being fat is not an identity because you weren't born obese, and whether you believe it or not, most people have control over their body's health. A common theme and the main point of my video is that nearly everything on this wheel is 100% within your control, and yet Sylvia here seems to want you to be a victim by attributing your temporary conditions to your permanent identity. The next category on Sylvia's wheel here is housing. Now, is it true that a landlord has more power than a renter? Sure, but what's up with putting homeowners in the center of the wheel? Do you mean regular people 10 years ago? I remember not long ago when most middle-class people were able to afford a home, and trust me, I'm not that old. It seems that most of the housing market collapse has been since that one thing that happened in 2020, but I digress. What I don't understand the most about this section of the wheel is that none of this has anything to do with real intersectionality. Intersectionality traditionally has to do with things about your cultural identity that aren't under your control. And although becoming a landlord or homeowner has become very difficult to achieve, it's not impossible. And for me, that's the point. In my opinion, it's such a huge waste of potential to be born in a country that people from all around the world go to because of the financial opportunities and equality it offers, and spend the vast majority of your time complaining. Now, don't get me wrong, people have the right to be upset about the economy, but if people from all around the world want to come to America because of the economic opportunities it can offer them without even being citizens of the country, that should say something. And for the people that don't agree with me here, I would urge you to visit any third world country next time you have some vacation time, and instead of just staying at a nice place, stay at a more local area and observe the life of other people living there. Now, I'm not trying to be judgmental here. I've just realized from my own experience traveling that the majority of Americans don't travel outside of the country except for an occasional vacation. And it makes sense because there's pretty much no need to, and also because mega corporations in America offer some of the lowest days of vacation time per year. I'm actually serious about this, as America offers the second least amount of paid vacation days per year in the world, only behind Micronesia. And to put that into perspective, according to this article, Mexico offers 14 and China offers 16, which may or may not be true. What is true, however, is this article, which explains that, quote, approximately 53% of Americans plan not to use all their vacation time this year, despite receiving 12 days annually, according to a recent study by travel platform Expedia. So maybe Americans don't like traveling, or maybe it's more of a hassle, or more expensive. Or maybe by the time our vacation time actually comes around, we're so exhausted from only getting 11 days off per year on average that we don't even bother with it anyways. But to get back to my secondary point, when you spend time around people in other countries, you quickly start to realize why everybody comes to America. Just the prospect of having any form of upward mobility is an absolutely radical concept for most people in the world. Now, let me make a concession here. It is a privilege to be born into a wealthy family or even a family that is able to give you any form of inheritance, whether it's a paid off home or something else. So I will agree with that. However, I don't think we should completely discount rich people's success just because they had startup capital, because there's a lot more to business success than only money. Speaking of that, let's move on to the next category of Sylvia's carnival wheel. Alright, looks like it's wealth. I mean, no shit, Sylvia. This seems pretty obvious. Having money equals power, almost always. But once again, people need to stop thinking about their wealth as their identity. It's damaging to do when you're poor, and it's even more damaging to do when you're rich. Yes, you can be born into wealth, but you can also lose it just as quickly. For example, apparently my ancestors from the early 1900s sold a piece of property that they had inherited for tens of millions of dollars, which adjusted for inflation is a lot of money, and lost it all gambling in New York. According to my family, if my distant ancestors had been smart with their money, we would have had generational wealth right now. Money is a weird thing because it's a lot like water. If you don't have it, all you will ever think about is having it because you literally need it. But if you ever get enough to quench your thirst, and it's enough that you aren't constantly worrying about running out of it, suddenly you start thinking about money a little bit less. Despite everything else I'm trying to say on this point, let me say one thing clearly. In America, your wealth status is not your class. In America, you can make as much money as you want to, and the only limiting factor is your determination. Now, I already know people are going to be making fun of me in the comments and telling me that I sound like a pull yourself up by your bootstraps boomer, and I understand where you're coming from. But once again, when you're feeling down about America's economy and job market, which really is bad right now, you should look on the bright side. Having American citizenship is already inherently incredibly valuable. As an American citizen, you also have special privileges that most other countries don't, such as being able to have a passport that easily grants you a visa into almost any country you want. Most Americans don't know this, but traveling around willy-nilly is actually a privilege that many people from other countries don't have. For example, look at this forum post. It says, quote, "My boyfriend is Mexican and we wanted to spend a month in the US this summer. I'm an American. However, it seems like any tourist or fiancé visa appointments are 700 days out. He has a small business, a coffee shop in Mexico, and family there as well." End quote. Damn, 700 days out? That's like 2 years. You could practically have an entire family in that time period. Well, let's see what the advice is. It looks like the only comments of advice on this forum are, quote, "Gotta wait, no way around it," and, quote, "Even if he was able to get an appointment, there's a high probability of denial," end quote. Do you see what I mean? Even getting to the US for traveling is difficult. Imagine waiting 2 years just to try to get a temporary tourist visa and you still get denied. Anyways, if you move down the comment thread, that same person goes on to say, quote, "A denial only cost you $185, end quote. What do you mean only $185? Just for reference, the Mexican minimum wage is about $2 per hour, and I'm not exaggerating at all. So this fee would take 92 hours of work or 2 weeks of only saving for a Mexican making minimum wage to pay. If we adjusted these hours for American dollars, if you live in a state like New York with a $15 per hour minimum wage, that is like paying a fee of $1,380. And for other states, assuming a median US minimum wage of $10, that's still like paying a $920 fee just to get your application denied. And by the way, this example is just for Mexicans. If you're from a country that's at odds with America, such as Iran or Afghanistan, getting into America as a legal citizen is legitimately like winning the lottery. In fact, sometimes it is winning the lottery. For example, America is one of the few countries that has a green card lottery, and it has a program called the Diversity Immigrant Visa Program, where it lets 55,000 people win a visa per year. So, what I'm getting at is if people are winning the lottery to get into this country, then what are us Americans doing, constantly complaining about it? Personally, I'm sick and tired of the ungratefulness and spoiled child behavior. Life is hard, but it's harder almost everywhere else. In some ways, America has become a paradox where life is so easy and convenient because of technology in Silicon Valley that we've lost all perspective on how much effort we are supposed to put into anything. If you don't believe me, ask an immigrant. Immigrants from rough countries have a unique perspective on how good life in America is and are commonly some of the happiest people I know. Just to be clear, if you're American like I am, I'm not blaming all of this on you. I'm just saying that all things considered, we have far less to complain about than we act like we do. There are different levels of privilege and quality of life, and because Americans have such a high quality of life, it's almost like we're in the highest level of the building, and most of us don't even realize that there are floors below us. For example, on the floor below us in this metaphorical building, tap water isn't safe to drink. Meanwhile, we are privileged enough to complain about fluoride, all the while assuming the basic fact that we can even drink tap water to begin with to be baseline. If there's a lottery to get into our country, we should be grateful for the spawn point. There is literally no better country to get rich in than America, and if you think you have it hard, so does the rest of the world, just without the same opportunity. Now, you might be saying, well, that's the problem. America is only a country to get rich in, not to live in and to enjoy life. And to that, I say, once you make money, what's stopping you from traveling? What's even crazier is that you have the opportunity, even if it's difficult, to get a remote job and make an American wage while enjoying the benefits and lifestyles of other cultures, which is the best of both worlds. Just having a chance at living a lifestyle like that is something that most people from other countries couldn't even imagine. Thus, stop focusing on the 0.01% you see on Instagram because it makes you think that that's everyone. In reality, the people you see on social media and across all media in general are the best of the best, and this warped perspective makes you constantly feel inferior and poor, all the while, in the eyes of the rest of the world, you are already the lucky 1%. Monetary status isn't intersectionality, it's completely under your control, and the only limiting factor is your own self-discipline and determination. And one last thing, money doesn't equal power and self-control in every way anyways. I know a lot of rich people who can't for the life of them get themselves in shape, exercise, or eat right. They have discipline in one aspect of their life, but not the other. So let me ask you this. How much power do you really have if the you of tomorrow isn't even obedient to the you of today? In my opinion, having complete control over your own actions for long stretches of time is one of the hardest tasks to achieve. Self-discipline is one of the highest forms of power because it allows you to have full control over yourself. If you don't agree, imagine someone who isn't very powerful, and then imagine if that person was suddenly granted the ability to commit to anything they wanted to do without giving up or changing their mind for however long they wanted. Suddenly, that person decides one day to create a schedule and stick to it no matter what. They get in incredible shape, constantly read books, and are always learning new skills. The rate at which that person's life would improve would be incredible, and that makes me think that most people's biggest limiting factor is discipline, also known as power over themselves. Most people don't have the capability to do what they say, and I'm not judging, I'm not very different myself. But power isn't just about money. If you have a lot of money, but no self-discipline required to handle that money, you'll end up bankrupt in a couple years, just like most lottery winners. In fact, if it were true that granting someone money automatically gives them the power they need to succeed, most lottery winners would end up being very difficult than how they usually do, which is either being broke within a couple years or dead. To be honest with you, Sylvia's wheel is mentally exhausting me, so let's just knock these last three out really quick. The last three categories of power on her wheel are language, gender, and citizenship. Once again, many of these are under your control. To start with, language can be learned. When I was in Mexico for 3 months, I was at a major disadvantage when I didn't know any Spanish. As far as power went, I legitimately had less power in every situation, especially involving the police, because I simply wasn't capable of speaking to them. Many circumstances got much worse for me simply because I wasn't capable of defending myself, and Google Translate can only take you so far. The good news, however, is that you can fix this by learning the language you need. I feel like this is just common sense, and it shouldn't have anything to do with quote-unquote intersectionality. Now, you could make an argument that it should be Spanish that English speakers need to learn to gain power in society, but that's not ever going to be true unless Spanish becomes the default language of the world instead. English is a universal language now, and most big events, movies, social media, and TV shows are in English. One I went on a couple of dates with, who I slowly realized was an undocumented immigrant, had been living in America for 1.5 years, and I'm not exaggerating when I say she didn't know any English past hello and couldn't even have the most basic of conversations in English. I also tried to teach her a couple of phrases, but she always acted completely uninterested. Now, you tell me, Sylvia, is this woman at a lower level of power in American society because she's a victim of not knowing English, or because she doesn't want to learn English? Or, in other words, does she have control over her intersectionality status? I think she does. The internet is free, and you can learn any language in the world, including ancient languages nobody uses anymore. Why should I feel pity for someone who lives in another country illegally for almost 2 years and doesn't even bother to learn one phrase of that country's language? What's most ironic about this is that when I was in Mexico, the locals understandably got mad at foreigners who spent months on end living in their town, yet put zero effort into learning their local language. One last interesting thing about this category is that in Sylvia's wheel, she puts people who learned English at a lower level of power than people who speak English natively. What is wrong with you, Sylvia? Are you just trying to demotivate people? What annoys me the most about her categories and her wheel is that for some reason, she's always in the center. I did a lot of research on every category involving the creator, and seemingly the only category that Sylvia doesn't have the most power in is being a woman instead of a man. Anyways, I really don't see a difference in power in someone who has an accent or not, as long as they can speak English effectively. If you can speak English effectively and are eloquent and put thought into your words, 9 times out of 10, people will either disregard your accent or forget about it because they're so impressed with how articulate, intelligent, or concise you are. Once again, you aren't forever defined by the languages you can speak, and whether or not you can learn a new is obviously something that you have a great deal of control over. Alright, next category, gender. Wow. Once again, Sylvia, the woke expert, is seen being unbelievably sexist. I think I'm starting to see a pattern. Of course, in the middle as the most powerful demographic are men. And second, because apparently, according to Sylvia, men are undefeated, is women. Then in the third place, with the least power in society, is, quote, trans, intersex, and non-binary. Let's start with the first category of complete BS. If you Google how many people are intersex, in big bold letters, it will tell you 1.7%. Now, immediately upon seeing this, I called Bull and did some research because there's no way that 1 in every 58 people I meet are genetically intersex. Well, it turns out another intellectually dishonest woke grifter named Ann Fausto Sterling falsely concluded this percentage in her book, stating, quote, the prevalence of non-dimorphic sexual development in humans might be as high as 1.7%, end quote. However, this was later scrutinized by Leonard Sachs Reports, who exposed that, quote, this figure includes conditions such as late onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia and Klinefelter syndrome, which most clinicians do not recognize as intersex, end quote. He then goes on to say, quote, if the term intersex is to retain any meaning, the term should be restricted to those conditions in which chromosomal sex is inconsistent with phenotypic sex, or which the phenotype is not classifiable as either male or female, end quote. He then went on to state that, quote, the prevalence of intersex is about 0.018%, which is about 100 times less than Fausto Sterling's estimate, end quote. Wow. All I can say is that this is blatant misinformation. What world do we live in where a disingenuous LGBT grifter can blatantly falsify data in an official report, quite literally be 100 times more incorrect than they should be, and still get promoted as the top search answer on Bing and Google? Anyways, genetically intersex individuals make up only 0.018% of the general population, and even after establishing this, I still don't understand how it makes these people have less power. Also, for goodness sake, intersex people aren't some convenient X-Men mutants like the left acts like they are. They're completely regular people with a genetic mutation. In fact, some intersex people are assigned a gender at birth, never told about it, and go on to live their lives happily without even knowing that they're intersex. Yes, some intersex people will face big challenges in life because they had the wrong sex assigned to them at birth, but from what I've read, intersex people aren't some in-between, mythical, gender-ambiguous creature that the left fantasizes them to be. Most of them are just a regular person who feels as if they're one gender or another based on their genetics and gene expression, and may or may not face complications in life due to the gender assigned them, or surgeries given to them at birth. In fact, I would wager that the most annoying thing truly genetically intersex people have to face is insufferable pink-haired activists constantly using them as talking points for their woke agenda, pretending to also be intersex when they're not, and not even understanding what intersex even means in the first place. Anyways, would this condition put you at a disadvantage? Yes. So do allergies and any other genetic variants from perfection. In some cases, allergies are mild, and in some cases, they make your life absolutely miserable. Either way, almost everybody has to overcome these type of things, and nobody has nothing wrong with them. Let's move on. Non-binaries next. All I can say is, what? Does anyone else remember when Demi Lovato came out as non-binary? Let me ask you this. Does anyone really think that Demi Lovato has less power or influence now that she's identified herself as non-binary? Of course not. If anything, she has more woke victim points now and has gained power in Hollywood because of it. Here's a question. Do you really think that if coming out as non-binary puts you at a lower level of power, celebrities like Demi Lovato would be telling everyone about it? If it really had that effect, nobody would be using this term to describe themselves, especially because this term literally has no impact on how people perceive you or your day-to-day life. According to Google, non-binary is a term used to describe a gender identity that is not exclusively male or female. Well, okay. So apparently it means that you're just something in between the two, but you don't know. Gee, that sounds totally logical and not mentally ill at all. Also on the list is trans. In my opinion, these type of wild claims are luxury beliefs and only exist because our society is run out of existential problems to solve. In many societies, you couldn't afford to be trans because you're just trying to get by. You're not sitting around wondering if maybe your entire gender has been wrong your entire life. If you don't believe me about the luxury beliefs concept, look at the decadence of late-stage Rome before its collapse. Although, to clarify, decadence is probably more of a symptom of a collapsing civilization than the cause. I want to be clear that, of course, I don't hate trans people, but I do think that the way we deal with these issues is incorrect. If someone has gender dysphoria, that is just mental illness. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not going to try to explain how to improve someone's gender dysphoria because I really don't know. But what I do know is that if someone is having delusions about something, the last thing a doctor or society should do is reinforce that person's delusions. In my opinion, this actually puts a lot of the blame on the doctors who encourage people to get surgery to confirm these delusions, especially when we're talking about teenagers and children. You shouldn't be able to permanently mutilate your own body in some way or another before you can drink alcohol. The reason I don't really agree with quote-unquote gender-affirming care is that I don't think I've ever really seen someone who has had these surgeries automatically fix their mental health issues. On the other hand, however, I have seen people with seemingly better mental health after detransitioning. Most trans people that I observe seem absolutely miserable and slightly angry all the time, and I genuinely feel bad for them. I think society is just purposely confusing them at this point, and anyone would get frustrated at the world if everyone was constantly pulling you in every possible direction concerning your mental illness. In my opinion, more research needs to be done about what causes gender dysphoria and what type of psychotherapy is effective at treating it. instead of telling people to invest in and commit to their delusions so that if they ever feel differently, it will be even harder to go back to their original body. Anyways, I think that gender identities are generally luxury beliefs that only exist because our society has run out of existential threats and has leaned far too much into decadence. The last category is citizenship. This one is interesting because in the center of the power ranking, Sylvia puts documented, and in the outskirts with the least power, she puts undocumented. If you illegally enter a country and thus your entire existence is breaking the law, by definition, you're going to have less power than a citizen because you are a criminal. I know some of you might be saying, how can you say that someone's existence makes them a criminal when all they want to do is live a better life and mind their own business? Well, let me answer that question with a question. If I break into someone's house by opening their unlocked door, walking in, and clean their kitchen for them, am I suddenly exempt from breaking the law because I'm being productive? I would still get arrested, and at the very least, the stranger whose house I broke into would have every right to press charges, whether my existence was benefiting them or not. This isn't a difficult concept to grasp. I mean, geez, the double standards are crazy. Almost every other country from which immigrants come from would lose their minds if Americans did some of the same things to them that they do to us. For example, I've occasionally seen illegal Middle Eastern immigrants at Palestine protests who burn our flag and chant things like "Death to America" and other nonsense. Can you imagine if the roles were reversed? What would happen if a Middle Eastern country like Afghanistan was in an indirect conflict with America or one of its allies, and I went to a busy public street in American clothing and burned their flag while shouting something like that? I would probably be killed. But that is an extreme example. Another, more tame example is that, again, many countries whose citizens enjoy entering the United States illegally complain about the same thing happening to their country with Americans, only in far fewer numbers and not illegally. For example, people would sometimes ask me if I felt bad about living in a small surf town in Mexico during the last winter, and although I didn't know what to say about that at first, I eventually realized that I shouldn't. For one thing, I stayed at a cheap hotel that had so little business that about 60% of the rooms were vacant, and if I weren't there, that hotel owner would have just had one less source of business. Part of the reason for why I started taking the gentrification argument less seriously is that the same thing happens to America, and nobody cares. When about 10 to 15 million people enter your country illegally in 4 years, which is anywhere from 3 to 5% of the US population, and nobody else cares about how it affects your country, I no longer need to give a crap about US citizens living in Mexico or the rest of the world. If we use Mexico, which is also the country with the most US expats, as an example, there were 800,000 American expats living there in 2024. That may sound like a lot at first, but considering Mexico's population is 128.5 million, American expats only make up about 0.62% of Mexico's total population, which is a far smaller percentage than even just undocumented Mexicans alone in America's population. The other reason that I don't care is that I legitimately make less money than the average salary in Mexico, so it's not really possible for me to raise local prices. And even when I do make more money someday, I'm very careful about the way that I spend my money, and I like to ask locals if they can show me their favorite spots instead of just going to tourist zones. Now, you might be saying, the term gentrification means raising the local prices. That's not possible to happen to an American. Well, maybe it's unlikely, but I do know that it has happened in Canada with rich Chinese citizens buying up their local housing market as their personal investment strategy. That being said though, I think people should not travel to small towns in certain countries without knowing how much they should be spending and being educated on how overspending can ruin the local economy. To get back to my main point, if I enter another country illegally, I will not have the same rights as a citizen. In fact, even if I enter a country legally, I will still not have the same rights as a citizen. In both cases, I will have less power until I achieve citizenship. I don't see the issue. If you don't want to have less power in the United States and be treated as a second-class citizen, don't enter the country illegally. And to be fair, I don't think our immigration system is currently perfect or even functional. If I was from another country and really wanted to go to America, I would probably have come across a wide open border too. Sure, many people don't like to hear that, but a lot of us would. We shouldn't be mad at anyone in particular for taking advantage of an opportunity when it presents itself. The real blame belongs to the leadership that is responsible. If I put myself in an immigrant's shoes, I can understand why they don't want to wait for the visa process. It's getting to the point where it's almost impossible to get citizenship within 5 to 20 years. So if I was an immigrant, I would probably think, damn, by the time I get accepted, I'll be over 30. I'll just hop the border, make some money, and figure out the rest later. So yeah, maybe we should improve our immigration system, considering it hasn't seen any significant changes since like 2014. Well, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this video. Follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you guys in the next video.